the 2025 Soul Foundation Symposium.
Thank you to everybody for being here. And let's be aware of the fact that what was a surprise for me was the fact that our investigation was totally confirmed in 2023 by David Grush. And so we became suddenly famous, because nobody had known that before, that we had written 25 years before a book about the so-called Magenta event. You see, this is the cover of the first edition of our book, and now there is the cover of the latest edition. And what is interesting, frankly, it was a surprise for me. I sent a copy of my latest edition of my book to the President of the Republic of Italy and also to our Premier, Giorgia Meloni. What is impressive is that our Premier thanked me with a mail for this. Frankly, I was surprised. Apart from that, what we are dealing with? In 1997, we received by an unknown source, by post, a lot of documents about this case. To begin with, these original documents were contained in this envelope. You see, the indication is the Senate of the Kingdom of Italy, and what it is written here is that what was inside this envelope was given by hand to His Excellency Galeazzo Ciano. At that time, in the 30s, Galeazzo Ciano was the Foreign Affairs Minister of Italy and Mussolini's son-in-law. Ciano was shot, was killed since he had voted against Mussolini in 1943 and had contributed to destroy the fascist power in Italy. His son, Fabrizio, was almost surely, he died in 2008, was really the sender of this material. He wrote a book when Grandpa had that shot. Well, inside this material we find a complete report of a 1936 event occurred in the skies above Venice and Mestre. It was an elongated torpedo-like object, followed by two smaller objects which had the shape of a priest's hat. There was also a telegram which says that total secrecy had to be maintained about this event. An interesting thing is that this event happened in broad daylight, and that two fighters of the Royal Italian Air Force tried to follow these objects, but in vain. This is the first and the last pages of the forensic analysis we had to do to verify that these documents were really old and written in the 30s. And it is exactly what we obtained. These documents are totally true. And this is the forensic analyst, Antonio Garavaglia, in the middle, who, for the Tribunal of Como, was the author of this analysis. Oh, by the way, we were not the first to receive these documents. In fact, later we knew that a very, very numerous group of pages, original pages of these documents, were sent to the newspaper of Bologna, Il Resto del Carlino. But unfortunately, since they were, after all, anonymous at that time, and considering that in a newspaper who was, of course, which was in a region which had always left power. Well, you consider that the journalists said that probably the fact that all this could have shown the fascist regime in not too a negative way, this was not incredibly politically correct. So they simply destroyed these documents. And we were told by this by the aeronautical expert, our colleague, journalist Marco Tavasani, who was a witness of all this. Oh well, the documents which were destroyed, well, were sent later by the sender, who had made photocopies of this later, and inside what we received, there were also some telegrams by Mussolini. In this, for instance, you may read that on the order personal of Il Duce, absolutely no mention is to be made of the alleged landing of an unknown aircraft on national soil. The same applies to today's news due for publication by the Stefani Agency and individual journalists. Maximum penalty for non-compliance will be enforced by the Tribunal for State Security. So, in other words, a total cover-up of the event. And apart this possible artistic reconstruction, this is a map of the zone in which this event may have had his impact. Well, what happened later? Well, we are told by the documents that Mussolini created for study, in order to study this strange object, a group of scientists, and called this group Cabinet RS-33. RS stands for Special Research. 33 has nothing to do with the date. 33 is just the section of the archives of the National Archives in Milan, dealing with new inventions and brevets. And this is, after all, logical, because the research they developed had, of course, a reverse engineering approach. And no problem about the fact that this cabinet was headed by Guglielmo Marconi. Guglielmo Marconi was a senator and also the president of the Royal Science Academies of Italy. Oh well, by the way, this is very curious. In the Gran Consiglio di Fascismo, here we have a very strange photo of Marconi in his fascist uniform, but because when you were in those meetings, you had to be dressed in this way. Okay, who were the heads of Cabinet RS-33? Mainly three persons: Guglielmo Marconi, of course, Italo Balbo. Italo Balbo was the creator of Italian aviation, and well, he was an aviator. He did incredible events. He had mass flights towards Brazil and the United States. He was on the cover of Time magazine before the war for his flights which crossed the Atlantic. And the other one was Galeazzo Ciano. Galeazzo Ciano was Mussolini's son-in-law and foreign affairs minister in Italy. Then you have here some of the scientists who were part of the Cabinet RS-33. The names are before you see. De Blasi, Cecchini, Giordani, Severi, Cozza, Lauri, Pirrotta, Bottazzi, and also Crocco. Crocco was a pioneer of aerospace science in Italy after the war. Well, another thing, Marconi was a believer in the existence of extraterrestrial beings, because he had, well, detected but not only him, of course, some strange signals from space, and he thought that Mars may be signaling us, he said. He was sure that intelligent extraterrestrial beings exist. And, well, last but not least, after Grush had spoken, we saw the nephew of Guglielmo Marconi, Prince Guglielmo Giovanelli Marconi, who released an interview in a very important Italian weekly magazine, Gente. Well, he said that, okay, I know that my grandfather really was the head of Cabinet RS-33. So he confirmed everything recently. And this is his interview, okay. Oh, well, so everything is clear? Well, yes and no. Consider that since this event really occurred, it was necessary for the fascist regime to cover it as far as possible. So here we see the most important weekly magazine of that period, La Domenica del Corriere, who had a cover in which a ball lighting hits a group of bikers near Magenta. In other words, this was a simple way to say, okay, something happened, but this is the answer. Okay, but it was incredible. We had also some witnesses. Of course, they are not direct witnesses. They are nephews of witnesses or something. The Daily Mail Online found an indirect witness of the crash. That is Marco Negri, nephew of Pietro, the mayor of Arona, not far from here, who told him he was informed of an unknown flying superfortress which has crashed in Lombardy before World War II. Not only. Also, Lieutenant Alfonso Carminati, which you see here in this photo, told his nephew, Professor Bruno Ferraro, who lives not far from here, the same thing, an unknown flying superfortress crashed in Lombardy before World War II. An interesting thing was that this object had no wings and had no engines. This was what he was told. Okay. Oh, by the way, we tried to understand if there was some indirect proofs of all this in the documents. And we asked the Italian Air Force, but they said, okay, you know, after the war, the Germans took a lot of our documents. Then the Americans came, so we have nothing about that. A person who seemed to remember something was a former Premier of the Italian Republic, that is Senator Giulio Andreotti. We discussed it with him and he said, okay, I must investigate. And he did. And later, before dying, he sent us 5 letters which had to do with a particular locality, that is Mount Sorate. What was Mount Sorate? Was a sort of Italian Cheyenne mountain. Mount Sorate was excavated for about 14 kilometers of tunnels and became a place in which the so-called protected workshop of the Duce were placed in order to work without the possibility that other people may see what was done. And this mount was later, after the war, during the war was also a base for the Nazis, and then became an atomic shelter for the Italian government in the case of nuclear war. You see, there are about 14 kilometers of tunnels inside this mountain. And this is just one of the letters which speaks about all this. You see that this letter speaks openly of Cabinet RS-33 and says that a part of these tunnels were devoted to the activity of this group, and they were experimenting unknown things about in the field of electromagnetism and optics. And this is extremely interesting. By the way, all these were top secret documents of the Supreme Command of SIM, the Servizio Informazioni Militare. That is at that time it was the secret service in Italy. By the way, what was curious is that, of course, the Italians tried to study, at a certain extent, the magenta object. But what is curious is that towards the end of the war, we had, for instance, the scheme of an Italian-German flying saucer made by two different engineers, that is Mite, German, and Belluzzo, Italian. You see that this is rather strange, but all this exists. It's not an opinion. Of course, it was never built. And you see, this is a German description of this object. And it was not the only one, because apart from the Belluzzo Mite flying saucer, also an engineer who followed Mussolini in his Filo-Nazi Italian Social Republic in northern Italy, he conceived this discomet, or meteor disk. You see, it's the same, a round object with a central cockpit. Well, in any case, the study of what the Italian technicians called the superaviazione, the superaviation, well, surely had some positive results. For instance, in 1939 in Italy, we had the production of the first jet, and it is the famous Campini Caproni Italian jet fighter, you see. It was not used in war, in any case. Then we had the surprise. In 2021, we had invited Luis Elizondo in San Marino, and he was interviewed by Mas Moskowitz. And in this interview, he spoke of the fact that he was aware that in Italy there was a crash of a UFO. And of course, when we learned this, we asked him, but how did you learn this? Did you read our material? No, this was told me by my intelligence, he said. And then we have also the question of Harald Malmgren. Of course, we may believe or not believe about this story, but it is exactly what he said. So we must be aware also of this. Opla. Yes, but what else about my personal 60-year activity in the difficult Italian and world UFP scenario? Well, excuse me, first of all, my wife, a very precious, intelligent, and understanding partner. Well, since the beginning, my aim was breaking the language barrier in UFO research. Since 1967, from Italy to the world, informing and contacting people. We had our first UFO Congress in Italy, in Riccione, and in the same year, we had to speak in the UFO World Congress in Mainz, where I was the speaker. Well, but it was extremely interesting. Then we had also other involvements. For instance, in Russia, we had a difficult but privileged direct relationship since the 60s to today. First, with Alexander Petrovich Kazantsev. We visited him in Moscow with my wife in 1974. Then the link with the father of ufology in Russia, the astronomer Felix Ziegel. Then with Boris Shurinov, the president of a Russian UFO study organization. He gave us a KGB UFO dossier, and we released it in the Western world, because they did not dare to do this in Russia, of course. Then I had also direct contacts with General Alexei Savin, who is the leader of the Russian remote viewers. Well, all this, frankly, showed me that the Russians are very, very aware of this problem. Then there is also the fact that we had positive relationships with Italian military and intelligence authorities. After my return to civilian life, well, I was contacted by the Italian intelligence army General Michelangelo Privitera, who asked me to cooperate for 7 years with him as a consultant about the UFO subject in the military field. I did, and well, this was very positive because for the first time, as far as I know, our center and me were received officially with a letter, a group of information from the Italian Air Force about UFOs as far the year 1977 was concerned. Then, just to show you something, everybody speaks about the tic-tac. Okay, here is a similar thing. Well, this is an official Italian case. On June 18, 1979, Italian Air Force pilot Giancarlo Cecconi was ordered to intercept an unknown target. He made about 90 shots with his machine gun, with his with his machine gun. And one of these shots were given him by his colleagues. This, of course, was not regular. But later he released it. So we had to ask the Italian Air Force everything about that, and they admitted. And today this case is officially listed in the unidentified cases, in their 500 official cases. Then, after the 1971 and 79 UFO wave, we became the representatives in Italy of Joseph Allen Hynek's CUFOs. And this was a very positive experience. Then I tried to verify things. So I was, as far as I know, the only Italian who investigated on the spot the Roswell case. I did this with Antonio Neus and Javier Sierra. And the results were very positive because I contacted, for instance, a lot of direct people who were involved, of course, in the case, from Walter Oates to Glenn Dennis to Robert Shirkey to Jesse Marcel Jr. And of course, I was convinced that the case was absolutely positive. Then we had also contacts in Italy also with Colonel Corso. Well, probably some of his statements may seem contradictory, but in any case, remember that he said that the Roswell case was completely true. Then we had also positive relationships with Italian political institutions and parties. Parliamentary questions about UFO events to Italian governments were supported and even created by us in 1978 and 1984. Then we had, and still have, positive relationships with the Italian Air Force intelligence. And you see, what is important is that we are highly considered by the Italian Air Force. Then we tried also to do other things. For instance, I was invited after the 1978 and 1979 incredible UFO wave in Italy. I was asked by Lord Clancarty of the UK's House of Lords in order to speak to the House of Lords, and I did my presentation in the House of Lords in London. Then we also did our best to support the initiatives of 3 different European Parliament Italians, the Honourable Regge, Musumeci and Borghezio, in 3 different periods. well, their initiative had no results, but we did our best to prepare them. And then a very interesting thing, we had also good relationships with Japan, with Dr. Esther, who unfortunately is dead. But when we had this kind of cooperation, I met there Dr. Starrock, and I saw with my eyes the Ubatuba UFO fragments given from Dr. Starrock to Japan for analysis. And also we spoke about the famous Trans-en-Provence case, which is the most important Japan investigated. And then another thing, on August in 1963, investigated by top Italian intelligence, a UFO overheard the Italian President of the Republic's car in his summer private estate in Castel Porziano. The top secret report mentioning only his driver was sent to the Pentagon and later declassified by the United States Department of Defense. Dr. Vallée, which is here with us, mentioned this event without details such as date, place, country. But I succeeded in identifying it, and I could expose it in the magazine of the Italian Air Force. And they said nothing, of course. They just published it. Please look, this is a description of the top secret report. You see the craft, it was a domed flying saucer with 3 portholes. And then I also give my contribution to SETI, because, an academic paper about SETI, UFO sociology and International Astronautical Federation was presented by me in this 1987 Congress. The same next year, always for SETI, as a follow-up of the previous paper. And in 1988, I had also the opportunity to do a very strange thing. Since the 1988 Congress of the International Astronautical Federation was in India, I asked to present a paper about Indo-Aryan traditions and the history of astronautics. They accepted it. This is the only academic paper about Vimanas, that is the incredible UFOs of the past, of the ancient Indian world. And we did also something interesting. We published UFO Dossier X, or OVNI Dossier X, an updated World UFO Encyclopedia published in Italy, Spain, and Latin America. It was more than 1,1600 pages, 5 sections, and documentary films in 35 videocassettes. It was a real positive initiative. And then the Vatican. We had excellent relationships with the Vatican. And, I did my best with books, for instance, Gods from Space, or UFOs and the Vatican. But what is interesting is that I and Vladimiro Bibolotti, who is here with us, lectured on request in the Vatican about UFOs. And this is extremely interesting, of course, you understand. Then there is the San Marino initiative. We had the 35 editions of our UFO World Symposium in San Marino with the San Marino government. And even we succeeded in having 2 different philatelic emissions about UFOs. So San Marino was important, but unfortunately, you understand, it's a very little state. Its importance is very limited. But he has representative in the United Nations. So after we had created in 2021 ICER, that is the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, which is a positive global group of experts from more than 30 countries in 5 continents. Well, after this, we had the initiative to present both CUN, our center, and ICER, Project Titan. Project Titan was a UFO political initiative towards the United Nations in San Marino, conceived by us, and whose aim is to transform the San Marino Congress in a UFO United Nations Congress, in the interest of the member states of the United Nations. It is simply this, and all this in San Marino. This initiative was, of course, accepted by the heads of state of San Marino, and later discussed in the parliament of San Marino. And at last, it was approved. It was voted and approved. That is, this means that the Parliament of San Marino charged their government to go on with this initiative. Of course, you understand, politicians are politicians everywhere. So they say, okay, UFOs, well, we have other things to do at the moment. And this is what's happening. In conclusion, we should be aware that surely the United States are not the center of the global, timeless and persisting UFO-UAP manifestation. So, a question is, what else? You should answer. Thank you.